Bum 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 bum. Bada bum 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 bum. Bum bum bum. Bum 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 bum. Happy 5th of July, everybody. It's good to see you. Come on in. Come on in. There's plenty of room. Yes, what a day. We got lots of stuff to talk about. But first, before we talk about all the stuff, there's something you need to do. Something you need to do every morning. It's called the simultaneous sip. Makes everything better. Yeah, it does. And all you need is a cup or a mug or a glass, a tankard, chalice or stein, a canteen, jug or flask, a vessel of any kind. Fill it with your favorite liquid. I like coffee. And join me now for the unparalleled pleasure, the dopamine hit of the day, the thing that makes everything better, including fireworks and pandemics, racism, you name it. It's all better with a simultaneous sip. Let us bring the country together. Go. And for my international viewers, we'll bring the world together. A second sip for inclusivity. Very good. Very good. Can you feel the unity? I think you can. A little bit. Because you feel, in a way, you feel exactly like you did a minute ago, but with slightly more unity. You feel it. I think you do. Well, as you know, fireworks were banned and outlawed last night because of all the dangers. But it was also the 4th of July, sometimes called Independence Day, at least for part of the country. And I don't think the citizens of the United States gave a fuck what the government said last night. I think everybody's just done with the government. It feels like people said, wait, it's Independence Day and the government's telling us we can't do shit? How about we just do twice as much of that shit today? How about we just actually have an actual Independence Day and just say fuck everything and everybody and just send off fireworks, mingle to our death, and live our lives. You know, I'm simultaneously thrilled and appalled by how Americans acted last night. You know, the appalled part is that obviously people acted in ways that are clearly unsafe and not recommended. Do I recommend that people act in ways that are unsafe, health-wise or fire-wise or otherwise? No, I do not recommend that. But when they do it, I like them better. I don't know. I can't explain those two feelings. I'm just going to have to be happy with having two conflicting feelings. It's like, no, don't do that. Well, I'm glad you did. I'm up to 500,000 followers, a little bit more. You might call that 500,000. I don't know. There was something. If you didn't see the videos of the wide shots of all the fireworks going off in LA last night, you have to look for that video. Because it's just sort of, I don't know where it's taken from, a high building or a mountain or something. And the entire Los Angeles was just exploding. Bam, 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 bam. I thought I heard more fireworks last night locally, just inside my house. I could hear more explosions. It sounded like it was in the middle of a war zone. Anyway, I've got 500,000 followers. As I told you, when I reach 1 million followers, I will effectively be running the world. Now, the reasoning behind that is that influence has two parts. One is how much talent you have for influence, but the other is how many people are paying attention. So if I can get 1 million people to pay attention, let's say 1 million followers, then I'm pretty dangerous. I'm halfway there. There was an article in The Guardian about magic mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms. And once again, there just continues to be mounting anecdotal and other evidence that psychedelic drugs and mushrooms, being one of them, help people with PTSD. Now, given the enormity of PTSD, especially last night. How many people got triggered last night who had military experience? Probably a few. And we know that the psychedelic mushrooms almost certainly, I would say at this point, the odds of these being effective medically without much of a downside, it's close to 100%. You know, when we talked about hydroxychloroquine, I still put the odds of that at, I don't know, 30%, that it's going to make a big deal, even though some of the studies say yes. So that's just so you can gauge my level of certainty. Hydroxychloroquine, lots of evidence, and still I just say 30% chance that that's really something important. But with the psychedelic mushrooms, I think it's closer to 100%, because it's just so universally true. If you gave hydroxychloroquine to 10 people and 9 of them said that just made all the difference, you'd probably stop studying it. You know, if it was that obvious that it made a difference, we wouldn't even be studying hydroxychloroquine. We'd just say, all right, we just give it to everybody. 9 out of 10 people got better an hour after they got it. And psychedelic mushrooms are sort of like that. You know, one trip and people say, I think it solved that problem. And it's so consistent that the fact that the United States keeps that illegal, so it's hard to experiment with even in this country. So researchers can't do what they need to do because of government regulations. If Kanye ran on a platform of getting rid of these weird drug laws, I don't know, he'd probably win. But the president should get rid of those anyway. Did you see the article in the New York Times suggesting that offices might need to spray bleach all over their equipment? Have you heard that? Yeah, the New York Times is reporting that because the World Health Organization is saying that the virus stays airborne for a while, that you might have to spray bleach all over your computers and your electronics every day in the office. Oh, they didn't say that? Oh, they didn't say that. So it's not true? Well, I read it right in the article. It said from the New York Times article, said that they were thinking they might need UV light in offices as a disinfectant. That's bleach, isn't it? I'm sure they taught us that. Because I used to think UV light was just part of the light spectrum, which happened to have the quality that it kills viruses. And back in the old days, I thought, it's just a light. But once the president mentioned using UV light as a disinfectant, I was re-educated to find out that when the president says UV light could be used as a disinfectant, potentially even in the lungs, because they're testing putting it on a ventilator and just ventilating your lungs directly with light. I mean, not ventilating, but disinfecting. But the mainstream media has taught me that what that really means is bleach. So even if you say UV light, what you mean is actually just bleach. So they want to just spray bleach all over offices, I think, unless I'm confused by the article. So the Washington Post, the New York Times, and every dead-brained Democrat has decided that the phrase for the summer will be dark and divisive. So the president's speech at Mount Rushmore was dark and divisive. Dark and divisive. That's really good. It's actually better than dark. You remember they got some expert advice in the last election, the Democrats, and after the president's campaign speech at his, whatever you call it, the Republican convention, they all said, it's a dark speech, it's dark, dark, dark. But now they've upgraded it to dark and divisive. Dark and divisive is better, and dark was pretty good. So the Democrats have cranked it up, and I would say the quality of their campaign now is pretty good. It's pretty good. So I'll talk about that in a minute. So it's really shocking and amazing if you happen to be aware of your environment, which many people are not. and you read how the press has clearly colluded. It's obvious that the press has gotten together. They all got the memo. They're working for the Democrats. We don't have any question about that anymore because they all come up with the same phrases at the same time. There's no doubt about it. And for them to turn that speech into what they turned it into, it's just amazing that people can read these publications and come away from them thinking that they're even trying to produce news. The fact that anybody thinks these are news organizations anymore is mind-boggling. But anyway, that said, I had my own complaints about the president's speech because he uses the words culture and heritage in ways that I think either are intended to be divisive in the sense that they're good for the base but not good for the general election, or he doesn't know the difference, and there's nobody on the team who can tell him the difference. Because honestly, if I heard heritage and culture and I thought that my background or my let's say my ancestors' history was mostly slavery and then the ripple effect from slavery, I would not be looking to celebrate heritage and culture. I would feel like, hey, that's white people heritage and culture. So I would say that is the one complaint that, well, it's not the only complaint that they have a good point on, but it's one complaint they do have a good point on. And to the extent that the president continues using words like that, and the Republicans do, those are losing words, in a sense. In other words, those are the words you use if you're not really trying to win, honestly. And some of us have had some question about whether the president is really in it this time. Now, I've heard other people say, I think Mike Cernovich says this, that the president's speech at Mount Rushmore was actually a strong rallying cry for the base. It was no more apologizing. It was more of an aggressive, statement of how things should be. And it was all of those things, but it was also included things like culture and heritage. Now, I know what you want to do. You want to say, no, those words mean X. Don't tell me those words mean this other thing, because they don't mean those. We mean these words to mean a way of life that includes, let's say, a strong family unit, things which have nothing to do with race. Don't tell me. I'm not the one you have to convince. I'm simply telling you that if you want to lose an election, use those words. I don't care how you define them. I'm just saying that those are election-losing words, in my opinion. Now, could it be that those are such strong words for the base that it gets more vote out? And I imagine that that's the calculation. But I think it also reads the mood of the country wrong, because none of it needed to be said. You could get to the same place without using those words. For example, you could say, let us appreciate the history that was not kind. Let us understand it and study it, but let us take the things which have worked well for our country for hundreds of years and have always worked well, and try to build unity around it. And if you said it that way, you could go on and say, we think strong family bonds are good. We think, whatever, education, whatever you want to say. So you could say anything you wanted and it would sound unifying. It would also sound perfectly good for Republicans because you'd still say, yes, we think your family unit should stay together. We think God helps. Republicans would say, yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. But if you try to capture all those concepts, which are strong concepts, if you try to capture them in words that the other side says mean something else to them, well, you're not really trying to win, right? That would be sort of how not to win. Now, I realize that there's an argument to be made that other people should not define what your words mean. If you don't mean them that way, hey, I don't mean it that way, so why are you taking it that way? I would say that that is a childlike view of the world, meaning that our words, if we mean to persuade people, we should choose our words carefully. If we don't want to persuade people, well, go ahead and use whatever words you want. If it's not your intention to change anybody's mind, use any word you want. It doesn't matter if other people don't like it. You're not trying to change their mind anyway. But if the whole point, and I think that is the point in an election, is to get people to vote for you, why would you use the words that guarantee they won't? I don't understand it. Because there are other words that are just as good for your side. Why would you use the words that are only good for your side when there are words that are good for your side and the other side? Seems like a strange choice. Now compare the president's approach, which I think you would agree seems primarily aimed at the base. Maybe you don't agree, but that's my starting point. Compare that to Joe Biden's speech, which he gave sort of his own version of a 4th of July speech. And I retweeted it without comment because it was good. I can do that, right? Is everybody okay with me retweeting Biden, who, I've endorsed just for my safety? But I don't agree with his policies. I don't think he's, necessarily all there. But I'm allowed to retweet him when he does something good, right? And I thought his 4th of July message about unity was very good. In a Republican way. In a Republican way. That's right. Joe Biden did a Republican speech for the 4th of July. And by that I mean he did not say, you're all a bunch of racists. He did not say Black Lives Matter. He didn't say that, he just didn't address race at all. He just said unity, America, America, unity, we're all Americans. It was very Republican. So who was he talking to? Was Joe Biden talking to his base? He was not, which is interesting. So Biden was trying to persuade Republicans, mostly, while Trump was trying to persuade Republicans. Interesting. Which one of those is the better strategy? I'm not sure we know. But it's interesting that they've chosen those paths because we like to see what turns out. There was something else that Joe Biden said that I thought was worthy of retweeting. He said this statement, which I know you disagree with, okay? All right, so in advance, I know you disagree with the following things that I say and also Joe Biden said, and I agree with him. He said, wearing masks is patriotic. Wearing masks is patriotic. Do you agree? I totally agree. I totally agree. And I will allow that you might disagree about wearing masks. You might say to yourself, hey, it's a free country. Am I arguing that? You didn't hear me argue that, right? Did I say that you have to wear a mask? I did not. Did I say that you're a bad person if you don't wear a mask? Did not. I did not. I don't have any insults for you. If you choose independence over wearing a mask, I have no comment. That's the choice you have. But I would say this. It is a known, understood medical fact, I'll call it a fact, that wearing masks might protect other people. Now, would you call that patriotic if you're doing something which is a personal sacrifice, something you don't want to do? It's a personal sacrifice, and you do it for the purpose of protecting other Americans. What would you call that? What do you call it when somebody personally sacrifices for the benefit of other Americans? Patriotic. It's patriotic. I completely agree with Joe Biden. Now, if you're disagreeing with that, let me reiterate. I'm not saying that you're wrong to go without a mask. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying that you can't have a different opinion about the expert's opinion of whether it's good. Absolutely you can. I'm not saying that you should curtail your personal freedom just because other people think you should. I'm not telling you that. I'm giving you a personal opinion that if you sacrifice for the benefit of other people, and here's the important part. your sacrifice for the benefit of other people might not be guaranteed. Meaning that you might say to yourself, I'm not 100% sure this makes any difference at all, right? Because we can't be 100% sure that it works, that mask works. You're just, the odds are good. So what would you call it if you weren't even 100% sure it made any difference? It was totally what you didn't want to do. It's completely a sacrifice, and the only reason you're doing it is to protect other Americans. Patriotic. You are welcome to disagree. You're welcome to disagree. And I won't even argue with you. It's just my personal opinion of that. So, I thought things were calming down for 2020. No, I didn't really think that. But last night, Kanye decides that he's in the race. Ye is running. Now, all we know so far is that he tweeted it. And now we're starting to learn how practical or impractical that is, because people who are smarter than I am are doing some Googling, and they're saying things like, somebody says wearing burqas is patriotic. Does that analogy, I think I have to respond to your bad analogies. Does that analogy make sense? You think a burqa and a medically required face mask that might last a few months, those are kind of similar to you? Somebody says, control. I said you could not wear a mask. What control am I putting on you? No control. Somebody says I'd call it stupid. You're welcome to. Masks are a sign of slavery, somebody says. Fine. No argument. You can have any opinion of it you want. But you must wear masks because experts are wrong 90% of the time. Perfectly acceptable. It is perfectly acceptable for you to say, the experts have been so wrong, I'm not going to do this. Now, I would have a different opinion, but I'm not going to tell you that's an unacceptable opinion. Somebody says they wear a mask to protect themselves. Oh, okay, fair enough. All right, so none of you had good comments, but there were lots of them. I'm sure I missed some of them. I probably missed all the good ones. All right. He did not say he'd run in 2020. Well, his tweet did, because it said Kanye 2020. All right, so Kanye says he's running. Does he mean it? Let's get to the questions. Does he mean it? I doubt it. I doubt he means it in the sense that he's going to do anything about it. I doubt he's going to campaign. I doubt he's going to do the paperwork. I doubt it. But, just for fun, what if he did? What if Kanye did win? It looks like there are enough states that he can't win in that he probably couldn't just win in a straight up way. But if you were a write-in, let's say, can you write in anybody you want? I have some questions about that. But I think you can write in anybody, right? Is there a law against write-ins? So is it technically possible? Now, even if you won in the voting booth, apparently there's another problem that's a little more technical. You're supposed to have electoral college people who are basically backing up your vote. I'll give it to you in the non-technical way. So if you're running for office and you don't have electors already set up in each state, then even if you win the state, there's nobody to cast your vote. Because just winning the popular vote or winning the state doesn't get you elected. It's the electoral college. So if you don't have your own electoral college set up, there's no humans who have that job for you to cast that vote for you, then maybe there's no way to do it. Because the system requires those electoral college people to exist. Now, could all that be put in place? Probably. I mean, nothing's impossible. Now, the big question is, if Kanye actually ran, who would he take votes away from? I think he would take them away from the Democrats. Would you agree? Would you agree that Kanye would just completely wipe out Biden's vote? Not completely, but he would take enough of it so it would make the difference. But let's ask this more interesting question. What if Biden just sort of dropped out? What if Kanye took so many votes away from Biden that Biden looked at the polls and he went from a commanding lead over Trump to 20 points behind? Let's say that happened. And then those polls showed that for a few weeks in a row, that Kanye didn't have a majority. He had, a solid chunk, but it took Biden down to, say, 20 points below Trump a few months before the election. What would Biden do? Ask yourself, what would Biden do? Well, of course, everybody would say, Kanye, get out of the race. You got to let Biden win. But would he? I don't think he would have announced if he wanted Biden to win. Would he? You don't really announce that you're going to run for president if you think the other guy that's already in it is the guy. And again, my guess is that Kanye's not completely serious about running. Maybe he's seeing what's going to happen. And then maybe he'll decide after he sees what the reaction is. I don't know. Anything's possible. The thing we love about Kanye, among other things, is that he's not predictable. If he were predictable, would you like him as much? No. He's an artist all the time. Part of being an artist all the time, not just when you're making a song or, making some fashion or something. He's an artist all the time. So he's always interesting. He's always surprising. And it's always fresh. You're like, okay, I haven't seen that before. So predicting what Kanye would do is always a tricky business. But imagine if Joe Biden said, all right, I'm out because under these conditions I don't have a chance to win. Good luck, Kanye. Do what you can. Just imagine that happened. It's not impossible. If Biden were 20 points down a month before the election and the only way you could get rid of Trump was Kanye being elected, right? You see it, don't you? If you think he doesn't have a play, he kind of does. He kind of does, which is brilliant. Because if he doesn't win, nobody's really going to hold it against him, right? Nobody's going to say, Kanye, you ran for president and you didn't make it. You loser? No. Because the way he's doing it, if he's doing it at all, doesn't look like a regular campaign. It would never be held against him to not be elected president in 2020. But suppose it worked. It could. Is it impossible? Not really. It's not really impossible. And if you saw a straight-up election between Kanye and Trump, I actually don't know who would win. No, actually, I take it back. Kanye would win. I think Kanye would win straight up. I think he would. Now, here's the other thing that might come of this. I've said before that I didn't think Kanye would run for president in a serious way, and we still don't know how serious he is. But I said I didn't think it because it would be a demotion. There's nobody else who could run for president, win, and you'd look at it and say, that's kind of a demotion. And I don't mean because Kanye is famous. I don't mean a demotion in that sense. I mean that what he's been doing for the last, couple of years, if you haven't been paying attention, is he's been doing sort of a Christian revival, or I don't know what you'd call it, but he's going very heavily into a spiritual direction. In my opinion, the country needs that more than they need a new president, right? Because there's sort of a spiritual void or something. I'm not a religious person, but I can feel that people are drifting. They need some kind of a connection to something bigger than themselves. It's just useful. So could Kanye be something more than a president? I believe he already is. Could running for president, or even teasing that he's running for president, help his real job as a spiritual unifier, which is what I think his greater purpose could be? I think it's all good. Anything that drives attention to Kanye is good for me, in the sense that I think it's good for the country. All right. Of course, I had to announce... let me give you another way that Kanye could be the kingmaker. Yes or no, whichever way the black vote goes, that will determine the next president. We're all on the same page of that, right? If the black vote moved, en masse to Republicans, which doesn't look like that's going to happen, but follow the logic of this. If the black vote went en masse, let's say 60% of them, and voted Republican, it would guarantee Trump got elected. We're all on board, right? That's just math. Likewise, if 95% vote Democrat, pretty much guarantees the Democrat will win. So I would say that black voters have complete control of the next president. Am I right? Now, I don't know if the Black Lives Matter protesters are quite understanding that they already run the country. Because they do, in the sense that they get to decide who's president. But, as others have said, they have abdicated or they've left free money on the table. Meaning that as long as you can depend on them voting Democrat, nobody has to offer anything. They've given away all their power by being predictable Democrat voters. Now, imagine, if you will, Kanye enters the conversation. Could Kanye end racism in the United States? Yes. Here's how. All right? And I'm not saying he's going to do this. This is just a mental experiment. Could Kanye end racism without becoming president? Yes. Here's how, okay? As I've described before, if everybody had a good education, there would still be racism in the world, but, you can't get rid of the way brains are organized. And let me start with an analogy to soften you up. Let me ask you this. Let's say you had a problem. There's a risk of drowning. What do you do about a problem that's a risk of drowning? And if you live on the planet Earth, there's water all over the place. You got your swimming pools, you got your lakes, you got your streams, you got bathtubs, you've got oceans. There's all kinds of places all over the United States that you can drown. So that's a problem. What are you going to do? Well, one solution would be to remove all the water from Earth. But it's not very practical, is it? You might even call it impossible. The other way to go is to learn to swim, or to build a boat, or to have some life preservers on you. Now, this feels very unfair, doesn't it? Because if you're a person who may or may not drown, is it your fault that there's water everywhere? It's not your fault, right? It's really not anybody's fault. It's just the way it is. So if you can't remove all the water from Earth, the only thing you can do is sort of learn to deal with it. This is much like racism, in my opinion. Racism is everywhere in the world that there are people, because bias is built into the way any normal brain is organized. It sees patterns, and then it acts on the pattern. But the trouble is, we're really bad at recognizing patterns. We can't tell confirmation bias, in other words, a fake pattern, from one that's an actual pattern. We can't tell the difference. And you've seen this 1,000 times in 2020 alone. People will look at the same news, they'll say, well, here's the pattern, and somebody else will look at it and say, no, this other pattern is the one that matters. We're terrible at pattern recognition. So, Black Lives Matter would like to reduce or eliminate racism in this country. Can it be done? No. No, it can't be done. It can't even be reduced. It's not possible. The only thing you can do is learn to swim. You can learn to swim. You can't get rid of the water, but you can learn to swim. And so imagine Kanye with this proposition. Again, I'm not predicting anything will happen, but you can imagine it. Imagine Kanye says something like this. Here's the deal. If you get education right, and you can make sure that every poor person, but black people is who we're talking about, but every poor person can have a real good education, then the perceived racism in a generation will look a lot less, because everybody that an employer talks to will be somebody who's well educated. They're not going to say, well, odds are, or anything like that. They'll just say, hey, well-educated kids. They're all good. If you could educate everybody equally, you wouldn't eliminate any racism. But it would be such a better world because you could slice through the racism like it didn't exist. So if you could slice through it like it doesn't exist, is there racism? Well, let me ask you this. Does Kanye experience much racism in his personal life? Things that he is discriminated against because he's black? I don't know. Yeah, there may be things that he feels are offensive, but I don't think racism bothers Kanye. Why? Is it because racism doesn't exist? No. It's exactly the same everywhere in the world, but Kanye is not bothered by it. It just doesn't affect his life in any way, at least in the big stuff, right? I'm sure there are offensive little things and things you imagine and things that are true that are in the noise. Now, we can't all become Kanye. If you could become Kanye or Michael Jordan or Oprah, the last thing you worry about in your own personal life is the racism that people are applying to you. It could be annoying, but it's not going to change your income. You're going to slice through life like it didn't exist. If everybody had a good education, they could do the same thing. So imagine Kanye saying, I'm neither a Republican nor a Democrat. But if we don't get education right for everybody being the secret sauce, we're never going to have a better world. Here's what I propose, that whoever makes the best offer on education will get my endorsement. So imagine that Kanye develops enough of a support base that he's actually polling with like 20% of the vote. So this is just mental experiment. He stays in the race conceptually. The next poll that comes out says he has 20% support. Well, now you have to listen to him, right? Because if he decides to endorse somebody, it's going to matter. So now let's say Kanye gets a 20% in the poll and he says, look, I don't know who's going to win, but here's my deal for you, America. Republicans, give me your best offer for what school would look like for everybody to make sure that you absolutely get a good education no matter who you are or where you're born. What's your proposal? Now, Republicans say something like school choice. They'll say something like charter schools. And guess what? Those things are very popular in the black community. The Republicans have a proposal for education, which, as far as I can tell, is far more popular among black voters, because what would they like more than a choice of where to go to school? I mean, that's pretty high on the list of things that can fix everything, right? You get your school right. So imagine Kanye saying, look, I'm neither Republican nor Democrat. I've got 20% of the vote behind me. I'm going to ask for one thing. Tell me which of you guys has a proposal. Democrats, your proposal is that the school unions own you, and you're not going to do a fucking thing. Is that your proposal? It is? Okay. Republicans, what's your proposal? And I'm not talking about college, because any black kid who's got good grades is going to find a way to get to college or get the training they need or skip college because maybe it's not so important anymore, learn to code, whatever. But you got to get the early school right. So Bernie's talking about free college. Well, that's great. But you got to get the early stuff right. So if Kanye could say, here's my deal, I'm going to go with whoever could fix racism. And the only way to do it is to fix schools and fix it for everybody. You give me the best proposal for that, and you have my endorsement. And then Kanye is not technically the president, but he fixes racism in one generation, fixes it. I mean, because if the proposals are good. And when I say fix it, I do not mean reduce it, because you can't. You just make it less important. That's fixing it. All right. Here's my campaign slogan. I've also announced that I'm going to run for president. I have a few requirements, though. I don't want to do any paperwork. So I've announced on Twitter I'm running for president, but without the paperwork. I also need to work from home. I'm not about commuting. And another big requirement is, this is my only policy proposal. all foreign dignitaries have to wear name tags. I'm not going to memorize all of these names of foreign dignitaries. I'm just not. So it's my one proposal, just wear name tags. Just do me a solid. Only when you're visiting. I also have a campaign slogan that I think is quite good. And it goes like this. Black lives matter more than others. Now you might say to yourself, whoa, 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 Scott. You can't say that. You can't say any group matters more than others. To which I say, well, I do not need your loser philosophies. I know how to negotiate. Everything's a negotiation in politics, right? Even if you're not calling it a negotiation, it's kind of a negotiation. Why would you, if you were selling a product, why would your first offer be the lowest price you're willing to sell it for? Why would your first offer be the lowest price? You'd start high and let them negotiate down to a fair price, right? So all good negotiation starts with a big first ask. So I would start with a campaign slogan of Black Lives Matter more than others. And then when people try to negotiate me down, I'd have room to go down. And then when they get down to say, hey, how about we just say it's all kind of the same? And I'd say, well, I don't know. I'm willing to listen to that offer. But my first offer is that Black Lives mean worth a little bit extra. A little bit extra. And then people say, we can't live with that. That feels like a violation of the Constitution. But can we talk you down to even? Can we get you down to equal? I'd be like, I don't know. You sound a little bit racist when you talk like that. But here's what we'll do. Now, you've seen in lots of deals that there could be things that are a trade-off. For example, you have to pay people more to work in a dangerous job. You have to pay people more to work on a holiday. All right, so you can see that discomfort and money can be substitutes, right? I'll pay you more if you'll take a little more discomfort. So there are lots of cases where money is a substitute. So I'll say, yeah, I'm willing to entertain your offer of bringing my first offer down to roughly equal, but you're going to have to kick in a little extra. Maybe some better schooling. Something. So I would just be a better negotiator, and I would get all of the black vote that way. So I might be your next president if Kanye isn't. There was a new fake video that CNN apparently ran and some others that seemed to indicate that President Trump didn't know that Operation Desert Storm was not in Vietnam. Now, of course, it was a deceptive edit, which they finally had to admit wasn't true. But can we learn from now that video lies? Can we all agree that video lies and that it lies almost every time? Kind of lies almost every time. So if you think I saw it with my own eyes as a thing, it's like you missed all of 2020. Anybody who says to you, I know it's true, Scott, I saw it on the video. If anybody says that, your best answer is, so it looks like you skipped all of 2020 and didn't notice that if it's on the video, it's probably a lie. That's why it's a viral video. All right. Did you see let's talk about a little more on Biden. So I offered in a tweet today, I offered a way to take him out of the race. And it would look like this. Now, this assumes that a reporter can ever talk to him and ask questions. I don't know if that'll ever happen. But there are two questions, if asked in this order, would take Biden out of the race. Are you ready? Two questions in this order, and it's the order that matters. It's got to be in this order. Takes him out of the race. Number one, do Black Lives Matter? We assume he'll say yes. Number two, here's the key question. Do white lives matter? What would Joe Biden say if after you said, do Black Lives Matter, and he said, yes, of course, and then you say, do white lives matter? What would he answer? Now, here's the beauty of it. If you had asked him, do all lives matter, he would know that that trap is coming, and of course, he would be prepared for it, right? I mean, he would be prepared for it. And he'd say, oh, let's not be divisive. We all want to live in a better world, blah, blah, blah. So he almost certainly would have a response ready. But if you ask him specifically, do white lives matter? What's the answer to that? It's not obvious, right? You would fumble on the answer. And in the fumbling of the answer, you would create the video clip, which would pretty much end his campaign. So here's my supposition, that because Biden's mental acuity is in question, and I think it looks like it's obviously less than it used to be. If you look at old videos of Joe Biden talking, it's really obvious there's something different going on. So if you ask him questions which are of the type he has answered before during his career, and I'm not talking about answered before as in yesterday, I'm talking about things which he has thought about for a long time, he probably has the right kind of memory capacity to dredge up some general answer, right? He could probably generally answer, somebody says, stop shaming him for stuttering. Well, I've never done that because I don't shame people for stuttering. But any question that he has never seen before, a novel question, should throw his brain into a reboot. So think of it in this way. I gave you one specific example of a non-standard way to ask the question, because the standard way would have been, do all lives matter? And of course, that's racially divisive. But the do white lives matter, you just haven't seen. Nobody's asked that specific question. So it's the uniqueness of it that would throw him off his game, whether it's this topic or any other. I have a self-defense recommendation for you, and it goes like this. If you accidentally hit a protester with your car, under normal circumstances, you should stop, right? Because if there's an accident, especially if somebody's hurt, you don't want to leave the scene of the crime. That would be another crime. You want to work it out. But in the specific situation where you hit a protester with your car, and there are other protesters which clearly would surround your car and kill you, can you leave the scene of the crime in that situation? I would say yes. I would say that even if you hit somebody with your car, you should get out of there as soon as you can. You want to leave as soon as you can. Now, to protect yourself, as soon as you're safe, you want to call the authorities and tell them what happened. I think that would be good enough to protect you. I'm not a lawyer, but I can tell you you're better off dealing with the legal consequences than you are with the mob that will certainly kill you if you stay around, even if it was an accident. Most of you saw the horrific accident yesterday. There's one fatality, and it was just horrific if you've seen the video. Joel Pollack had this interesting twist on two ideas. He put them together. I guess his wife, he reports, says this. This is Joel's tweet. My wife's 4th of July idea, put the proposed National Garden of Heroes along the national bicycle path that Scott Adams proposed. Now, I should remind you that somebody else, before I thought I had this great idea of a nationwide bicycle path route with lots of support structures that would create lots of jobs around the way, and then it would be a sort of a robot-proof business because you would need lots of humans to maintain it no matter what, at least for the foreseeable future. And then there's the idea of putting all the statues in a national garden. But what if you had the statues put near the bicycle path, or the bicycle path goes where they already are, so that you would have a continuous history lesson at each stop. So you'd be, on the surface, you're bicycling across the country or just some part of the country. You don't have to go the whole way. But every time you stopped, there's a statue. Might be Martin Luther King. Might be George Washington with some context. Well, he was a slave owner and we don't like that part. Whatever you do. But basically, Make sure that everything's in context. If you want to make sure that you've got the, more modern and, non-slave owner statues, then do that too. Throw a Columbus in there, but give the full context. Why not? And then, of course, they would be torn down in an hour, so it wouldn't work. But I think it's always fun to noodle on these kinds of ideas because it might give you ideas for better ideas. In the movie business, that's called the bad idea. So somebody comes up with a bad idea, and you know why it's bad, but that makes you think more creatively, and you end up with, wait, if you changed it a little bit, it would work. And that's what would be the good outcome. All right, have I talked about everything? Have I talked about everything? I think so. How would you make it flat? Excellent question. And I mentioned that before. Your bike path would not need to be flat everywhere. It could be flat in parts based on just the local topography. But because the electronic bikes are now, they've gone from maybe a novelty to I own one now, and it's completely changes transportation. I won't go into my long sales pitch on that. But with the electric bikes, they give an assist to your pedaling. The hills don't really matter. So even at my age, there's no hill in my neighborhood, and I live in I'm in a really hilly place. There are really steep hills where I live. They just disappear with an electronic bike. So there'll be more of those, and you could probably rent them. You wouldn't have to bring it with you. You'd just rent it on site, just like any rental car, etc. They're in the range of they could be $4,000 to $8,000 or $12,000. Mine cost $4,000. My guess is that it'll be $1,000 in a few years. Probably in 3 years it'll be $1,000, and then you still might not want to own one, but it's a very economical thing to rent. If you're renting a $1,000 item, probably doesn't cost you that much per day. All right, that's all for now, and I will talk to you tomorrow.